Page 35, volume 2 of the Maamar in the Maamar Ki Bayom Aleichem.
Rabbi Dolphin?
Yes?
Sorry. Quick question. Does anybody have a problem right now with not seeing Rabbi Dolphin?
No, I see him.
You see him? Okay, so I don't know why. I don't know, I'm having a problem with my Zoom. Okay, all right, never mind. Go ahead.
Okay, so towards the end of yesterday's shir, the Rebbe really made it very down to earth, and the Rebbe said that he asked a question at the beginning of the Maamar, that the second segment of the Maamar, please turn off your mutes if you haven't yet. The second segment of the Maamar, Mikol Chatoseichem Lefnei Hashem Titaru, seems to be superfluous. Why? Because in the first segment, it says already, Ki Bayom Hazeh Yechaper Aleichem, on this day, Yom Kippur, Hashem forgives you for all of your iniquities. Why the second segment? Mikol Chatoseichem Lefnei Hashem Titaru. It seems redundant and unnecessary. He answers this question already at the end of the first chapter. And he says that this doesn't refer to what you would call hardcore sins. No. And the Rebbe says, let's take a person who davens 3 times a day, who has set times for learning in the morning and the evening, who fulfills mitzvahs, and who even sometimes davens with soul, with kavanah, and he has good midos too. And he's careful with what he speaks, what he says. And he has even words of Torah memorized. And wherever he goes, he reviews those words of Torah. Yet, so he feels nucky. Remember, the Rebbe brought a very important teaching that's relevant to all of Torah throughout the year. The word chet, which we translate commonly as sin, has 2 meanings. One, from meaning lacking, missing. When you do a sin, you're causing Hashem's energy to be lacking from the place and time where it's supposed to be vis-a-vis your sin. And number 2, chet comes from the word chite, to purify, v'chite es habayis, cleanse the house. So the Rebbe then says that the second interpretation of chet, to cleanse yourself, is because one may feel, after doing everything that's so good and so correct, that he or she is pure. What else do you want from me? Noki be'enei atzmai. The Rebbe's language is, Asher al yedei kol zeh, by doing all of the above that I just repeated, hu noki be'enei atzmai, he is pure and clean in his own eyes. Meaning, there is an ego attached to everything he's doing. Therefore, says the Rebbe, lechet yechoshev, this is considered really a chet, a sin. But wait a minute, Rebbe, I'm not sinning, I'm going to shul, I'm learning and davening and all that. Yes, but there's something deeper that you're expressing and living with, which is ego. And that's the Mikol Chatoseichem. The addition of Mikol Chatoseichem is this type of flaw. And this type of flaw can only be eradicated if Lifnei Hashem Titaru. If you have a face-to-face engagement, an appointment with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because then, to the deputy, you can tell your story. To the Gabbai and Shamish, you could tell your story. But when you're face-to-face with Hashem, 2 eyes looking into 2 eyes, standing in close proximity, you tell a story and you will just get it right back, shot down, and you'll be embarrassed. So therefore, you don't tell a story and make up, if you're living with ego that's behind everything you're doing, or some of what you're doing, that needs to be corrected. So Lefnei Hashem Titaru. Purify that nikayon, that sense of I'm better than the other because I do this and that, purify it vis-a-vis standing and facing Hashem, Lifnei Hashem. Let's continue now on 35. To understand this better, the Chet Loshen Chesarin HaYesh B'zeh Beid Madregis. Now he goes back, Moshe, to the first interpretation of the word Chet, which means lacking. So he says there are two levels. You know, in Hebrew we have two words for sin, chatoim and the word avonos. The Rebbe says that the implication of the word chatoim is more lenient, not as bad as the word avonos. Umikolshkein, and surely there's a third word, a synonym for sin, which is pishaim. You understand, right? So we had chet, avain, and pesha. And by the way, you're going to read those three words during the davening Yom Kippur, so pay attention. The pshoyim heim hamoirdim rachman litzlam. Pshoyim are even worse than avoinos. Pshoyim is rebellion. There is a person who does a lightweight sin, you know. There's a person who does even a heavy sin, but it's their own, you know, they're not doing it because they want to, but they can't control themselves. Then there is pesha. Pesha is merida. I'm doing it because I don't care, God forbid, about you, and I'm rebelling against you. I'm going to show you that on Yom Kippur, not only will I eat, but I'll eat ham and treif. I'll make my sin so bad, like driving. Not only will I drive over the speed limit, but I'll drive over the speed limit speaking on my phone. Right? Let me see you catch me. I'll do all the violations at one time.
Rebbe.
Yes.
Rebbe. Pshaim in Hebrew, modern Hebrew, is crimes.
Okay, this is not modern Hebrew. This is biblical Hebrew. This is based on and it's also based on the Chazal's interpretation. It's not, you know, yes, Hillel.
I think there's a case the Gemara brings, I think, in Krisos, of the guy who eats treif on Yom Kippur, and all the Isurei Koresh.
Five, I think 5 Isurim at one time. Okay. So Rahman Litzlan, K'moya Molik. The Rebbe says, the Rebbe gives us an example from Torah. Take, for example, Amalek. Amalek knew very well who Riboino is, who his master is, and nevertheless he intended Mechaven Limrud Boy to rebel against his master. Why do I do the sin by a person who's this type of person, or this, at least at thinking this way? This guy want to rebel. Everything is driven by rebellion. And he has Mesiras Nefesh to rebel. The lies, look how the Rebbe explains it. The lies, not only isn't it Moshe for his betterment and his pleasure, Yoni. In other words, by him doing the sin, the way he's doing it, he's making himself very uncomfortable. Not only is he uncomfortable, he's suffering pain when he does it, but he's driven by rebellion. I'm sure Hillel, there's a psychological term to express this type of behavior. It's all driven by merida. Yonason, even if I'm hurting myself, I still have to rebel. Yes.
Just want to comment that when I was doing a lot of addictions counseling, one of the things I would say is that all relapse begins with the same 3 words, which are "I don't care."
Yes, but Hillel, here we're not saying just "I don't care." We're saying I care to rebel. Wouldn't that be different than I don't care is like, apathy, whatever. But rebellion, what?
Well, the
Without
reason
it.
I said it is that often there's often there's an element of that, of rebellion, when somebody who has established their recovery, their ability to kind of live without some kind of compulsive or addictive activity, and then they relapse back to the addicted. It begins with that kind of rebellious, I don't care, I'm just not going to keep the restriction on me anymore. I have whatever grievance I have, and I'm going to go for it. That's
And,
what.
and even in the face of making it painful and to myself, even if I'm going, in other words, is there tsar? Is there?
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't care. At that moment, I'm rebelling against all consequences,
Okay.
all authority.
Okay, Ashakoyach. U'k'moi shekosuv, as it says by Amalek, Asher korcha baderech, which one meaning means he happened to meet you on the way out, right? But also korcha means from the word kar, cold. Moshel lambatya, the moshel is of a bath. Roisachas, of a boiling bath. No one can go into this hot bath. It's too hot. Comes along one no good person, one person who's a troublemaker, and he jumps into it. Although he burns himself in the process. But meanwhile, the fact that he jumps into the hot boiling bath, he has cooled it off, albeit a drop, a little, but he still has cooled it off for other people. Right? So he's doing something that's painful to himself for the purpose of which is to make other people also, in this case, benefit from a hot bath in our moral in a negative way. Okay, this is very common. You have, for example, an azpam. Azpam means a person with chutzpanyak, a disrespectful person who has azut, panim. Shemei is legodl. There's someone who's really a godl. I don't mean a godl, someone who really is a quality person. And all of a sudden, this nothing stands up to him and, speaks disrespectfully. I just had such a case yesterday in shul. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm the godl and he's the low one, but, it had definitely those feelings. Hagam sheyadea migoydel mailosoi. Although the godl knows of his great qualities, although the person who has the chutzpah knows about this person that he's having the chutzpah to's great qualities, so if you know who you're talking to, why are you doing that? You know why you're innocent? Because chafetz limroid. He has to rebel. He has to do this to show that he doesn't care, like Hill said. All of this ends the discussion of what posheya is in these terms. Now comes v'avoinos. What are avoinos? Heims doinos. Purposeful sins, knowing full well what you're doing. Turn the page 36. He knows that what he's doing is, God forbid, against Hashem's will. And he does not want to, God forbid, rebel. But because the corporeality, the coarseness of his indulgences overpower him, an addiction, he can't control himself. Sometimes he even has pain that he can't control himself. The first guy, the posheya, he has no pain. He's very happy to rebel. The one we're talking about now that does the avonos, he might be in great pain because of what he's doing and because he can't control himself. And especially when it comes to thoughts and inappropriate bad thoughts, which lead him to doing an action that is bad. He can't control his thinking. And these are called sins of the youth, referring to masturbation. It comes from the boiling of the blood, youthful energy. And that he's very aroused, you know. Although he knows that this behavior destroys his body, and it hurts your soul. He can't control himself. And he desecrates God. We're not talking here about an accidental omission. We're talking about intentional masturbation, knowing full well what you're doing, but you cannot control yourself. That's why it's called zodin. Uzdoinois and azodins, doinois, plural, nikroyim avoinois, are also called avoinois. Shumaloshim, what does the actual word avon mean? Miloshin ivus v'ikum, krum. Krum is a Yiddish word which means crooked. Take, for example, the nature of people. We see in actuality, there are people who are very talented. They have great creative ideas. And they have very good comprehension. They understand everything very well. Umasigim, or you say al-buryan, they understand it thoroughly. It's not like a superficial understanding. They really understand the intricacies of what they're studying and learning and reading about. V'imzeh, nevertheless, together with this understanding, they have some kind of crookedness to what they understand. Asher abechein, and it expresses itself that the bottom line, the result, and the condensing of their entire elaborate understanding by the Geil Apoel when it comes to bottom line, Eine Masen Klal does not fit at all in the Kudas Askola to the point of thought Shebasogahi within that idea. In other words, they can philosophize and give you the best arguments, and when it comes to bottom line, they do just the opposite of what they understood, or if they don't do just the opposite, they do it in a way that's crooked. And it's because of this crookedness. That's called in the Yiddish language, and this beauty, akrumer seichel. In yeshiva we had this. We used to learn, and then the guy would come up with a bottom line, and you would hear someone say, your cup is krum. A krum is seichel. A crooked seichel. How do you come to that conclusion from this elaborate understanding? It's because somehow you have some ivus v'ikum when it comes to poel mamish as a result of that elaborate thought. Oi, we say a krumer moyach, a crooked brain. Or in Yiddish, we would say in the yeshiva, a krumer kop. Someone says, what do you think about this and this? Oh, yeah, hot a krumer kop. Doesn't mean that he doesn't study. He can study a lot. But somehow, when it comes to implementation, it's a krumer kop. His head goes crooked. So the question is, Yoini, how, from understanding something elaborately, do you get to crookedness? Says the Rebbe, it's because there is some crookedness in what we call the Kliya Seichel. He doesn't elaborate here, but there is the Or HaSeichel, the energy, the light, the idea, and there is the receptacle for the idea. And it could be that in the thought, Yonason, in the thought, he's very straight, in the but in the kli, in the way he interprets and brings it into his own vessel, his intellectual vessel, that's where there's a crookedness. That's what he alludes to here, I think.
So he's saying like he's biased.
What?
He's biased.
Yeah. Well, the poem meaning he was a king, but Kli HaMoyach. And the Rebbe says, so before Hillel, he was talking about a crookedness that comes, bottom line, Moshe, right? The response, the result. Now he says, Yaini, even sometimes there's a crookedness in the head itself. Before even we talk about the goof, the poil mamish. He says, the evils v'ikum hu beklei hamoach. V'cheinu ba'avoino is so too with these type of sins done specifically, knowing very well what you're doing. The ba'achash yadeya shenegeh benafshe of a gufay. Since the person knows that it's relevant to your soul and your body, it's hurting. In other words, he's talked about masturbation before, but it's true for all Averas. You know the damage that it does spiritually and physically to you. Yet he cannot control himself to prevent himself from this behavior. The Rebbe says, this is a crookedness. In other words, I understand you can't control yourself, but it doesn't equal. It doesn't come. If you understand that you're hurting yourself and you're a normal person, you want to be normal, then how can you do it? The answer is because there's a crookedness there. And the Rebbe's argument is that so this maybe, I don't know how, this maybe, goes against the psychological understanding of addictions, but the Chassidus and the Alter Rebbe see it, the moyach shalat alev b'toldusei. It's not just that the brain, the mind over matter in training, but genetically, Hashem gave a person a moach, and by its very inherent core, it can't control the leiv. B'toldusei, Moshe, the chiddush is with the word b'toldusei, from birth. It's not something you have to be trained and taught. Yeah, you have to be trained and taught if you messed it up. So you have to go to rehabilitation, how to relearn and experience moyach shalat alev. But say, bar that experience, it's natural, says the Balatanya in chapter 12 and 17 of Tanya, for the moyach to naturally dominate over the heart. Stop. Here ends the Rebbe's explanation of what avonos are. So we explained already what peshoyim are, and now he concluded explaining what avonos are. And now he goes on to the third category, which is called chatoyim. The chatoyim meilu ashgogis. Chatoyim are the type of transgressions that are accidental. Shogeg. The chet ishkogo hu al sher eina mekadosh atzvim mutraloi. What is the transgression, Yaini, of a shogeg? It's that a person hasn't trained himself to be holy, to sanctify themselves, even with matters that are permissible. The sibes chet b'shchoga hu lefi shemurgo me'oid b'dvorim amutorim. Habit. I'm so used to doing things the way I've been doing them that I just continue doing him. In Yiddish, look what he says. Famous Chabad saying, Das was mir mog darfer will. What a person must have, he needs and wants, das and das was will tut This and this that he wants, he does. So in other words, you must have food to survive, right? You must sleep to function. But you don't have to indulge in it in a way that is considered taiva. Memele gamlet var iser. Practice makes perfect, my friends, right? Well, it works also regarding our mishigasim. Practice makes perfect. If you practice a certain behavior and this is your norm, what happens? That leads to total disregard for rules and regulations, and you end up doing something that is isur. Hillel, you want to say something?
I was thinking when you were saying that in the cycle of learning something, that you start out you start out with having to do something, to do all the steps consciously, and then as you integrate them, you're able to perform the actions more and more unconsciously or more reflexively. So it's really fascinating to think that that's also how it goes with the Beirut. That it sort of bypasses the thinking mind in that sense.
Right. The laxity, the customizing laxity in one's life leads to all kinds of loose behaviors, including forbidden ones. There's two things, right? Chalev is forbidden. Shum, in fact, is permissible. I want to eat shuman. But when I want to eat shuman, boy, I want to have that steak and those lamb checks with gravy. Thanksgiving dinner has 25 gravies, and I have to have all the different, right? Well, guess what? Your taiva of just indulging, it's kosher. And it has 65 achsherim, and the badats, and the shmadats, and bells, and chasam sofer, and chabad, and the litvax, and Rubashkin here, the old man, God bless him, he passed away this year from COVID, he was 92. I knew him, was a very special Jew, a Russian Yid, a Lubavitcher. In his office, here on 14th Avenue in Borough Park, downstairs was the store. It didn't even have a sign on it. I mean, it was, the certain stores in Borough Park, they're the same way they were 60 years ago. No sign. Bigeleisen doesn't have a computer in the front. He doesn't even have a regular, they used to have the registers. He doesn't have a register. He has a little calculator. And the man sells, I'm sure, the most foreign in the world. The world. And you walk in there, it is so backwards, yet. So Brubashkin's store was another example. Here he is in his heyday. He was the king of meat. Iowa, before the fiasco. And there isn't even a sign. Finally, someone put on a little sign, Rubashkin's, in the window. So you go up to his office, Mr. Rubashkin Sr., the father, the Zaidi at the time, and his office was upstairs, and also that, it was like our home office, I'm sure, Moshe, you have a nicer office than he does. Anyway, so you go into his office, and you see on the wall, Hechsherim, Margaretin, Diekis, Satmer, Lubavitch, Litvish. So people asked him, Mr. Rubashkin, why, they're all good Hechsherim. What do you need? An OU. What do you need to have? He says, I want to make everyone happy. I want everyone to eat my meat. I don't want a yekka to say I'm not eating the meat because it doesn't have the yekka, and the satmer to say it doesn't have the satmer, etc., etc. So here it is. The whole idea of accustoming ourselves with all the Hechsherim. And we live at such a time, and in a way, it's gewaldig. It really is gewaldig. Baruch Hashem. The problem is, if you get stuck in the rut, and you forget where it's coming from, then you end up eating not shuman, but treif, chalev. V'hu shoygig. And that's an accident. I meant to eat shuman, not chalev. Harei, the chay to kalm oven. What do we see from this, Moshe? That the concept of chait is more lenient than the concept of oven. Umikoshkein, and surely it's more lenient than pesha, which is rebellion. Finished. So now the Rebbe has finished explaining the three categories of sin. I think this is something that we can and should work with on Yom Kippur, and even up to Yom Kippur with our family. You take such a piece of Maamar, it's so explainable to children and grandchildren, wives and friends, and use it. Okay. Now he says, Uve tshuva nema, when it comes to tshuva, it says, Anoichi hu meiche peshecha. I, Hashem says, Hu meiche peshecha. I eliminate, I erase your sins. The hu yizbarach mikabel shavim. Hashem accepts tshuva. People who do tshuva, bali tshuva. The gam ha-poishim, even those that stoop so low to be in the category of rebellious ones, poishim, emoisim tshuva, moiche pesheim. If they do tshuva, Hashem says, I erase their pisha, their pesha, their crimes, as Yoni said earlier. And the Gemara says, Mishnah says, in Yuma, and guess what happens? There's doinus, their intentional sin. Not only do they become considered accidental, they're actually considered zchuyos, meritorious. Could you imagine going from a zodain, from an intentional act of evil, of bad, of rebellion, going from there? I'm sorry, even rebellion. It becomes not just accidental, which is more lightweight, but it becomes meritorious, zechuyos. The zel mitzad rachmim atzmim, the atzma saying sof. This is because, as Yaakov Spiel said yesterday, referring to God's mercy, he said, Tata hab rachmonis, God have mercy. And God says, I'm going to have mercy because I am Mr. Mercy. Rachamim atzmiyim, the atzmu saying self Baruch Hu, essential mercy coming from the very core and essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shelamayla, you give him this rachamim, which is way greater than the 13 attributes of mercy that Moshe brought into the world. Why? That you'd give him this rachamim, those 13 attributes. Amar Chazal saying Yuma, Amar Moshe, next page 37. This is what Moshe said, Master of the universe. If the Jews sin before you, and they do tshuva, make their intentional sins considered accidental. That's what Moshe requested. But v'hu yizbarech, but Hashem, God Almighty, moichat peshoyim, ve'ina masker chatoyim. He erases completely the rebellion, and he doesn't mention at all even their accidental averos. In other words, Moshe, listen to this, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't request an entire clean slate. He said, listen, take what they did that's intentional and make it accidental. Give them less of a penalty. Hashem says, no. I'm going to erase what they did completely. Why? Because he's Bala Rachamim. A Bala Rachamim is able to go from one extreme to another extreme. Very important lesson about the idea of mercy. Mercifulness is complete atonement. The average person cannot come to that. You know, if someone hurts you, and you know it's Yom Kippur, and he's going to ask for forgiveness, and you're going to forgive him. The average one of us, we forgive them, but we still, you know, they still hurt us. I'm going to forgive you. I don't want your bad. I don't want you. But, you know, could you imagine the feeling, I love you so much, even though you hurt me, because I forgive you now, and it's like you never hurt me. That's an accomplishment. That's a real tshuva. It says, and your sin, loy eskar, I will not remember. That your intentional sins are turned over, converted, transformed to merits. But when it comes to sins that are actual, accidental, tzrichen tshuva. Now you know why? Because you don't know. Why is it, Moshe, that's doinois, they become through tshuva zechuyos, but shkogos don't, because if it's an accident that you don't know, your sense of tshuva is not as powerful. Because either you don't know, and if you know, you say it was a mistake. So if it's a mistake, you don't have as much remorse. Yes, Moshe.
What about the middle category? Said avonus.
So avoinus would go into the zedoinos, which are intentional.
What's the difference?
The difference is whether I know what I'm doing intentionally or not. Shoygig is accidental. Either I didn't know I'm not allowed to do it, or I forgot. I knew, but I forgot. Shoygig. Accident.
So what's the difference between zedonos?
Zedonos means I knew. I knew exactly what I'm doing. I knew what I'm doing, but I can't control myself. There's three, again. There's shoygig, there's zodoin, and there's posheya. Posheya means my intent is to rebel. Even if that's not your intent, but if you know what you're doing and you want to do it because you can't control yourself as he allowed, that's still a zodon. It's not an accident. The fact that you can't control yourself does not mean that you don't know it's Shabbos. I know it's Shabbos, and I learned the halachas, but I can't control myself. I need to use my cell phone Shabbos. That's a zodon. Shoygig is, I don't know that you're not allowed to do this and this activity, play with silverware on your table, if you're not using it, because I don't know the halacha that's forbidden, that it's considered muktzah. I don't know, I didn't learn that halacha. Shoygig. So the position, I want to conclude, the position of shoygig needs tzrichem tshuva, v'hu acharot ala'avar. This is regretting what you did in the past, the Kabbalah Tov al and accepting good for the future. To separate yourself from things that are permissible and sanctify yourself with things permissible. What the Rebbe is getting at here is basically that it's much harder to do tshuva for shkogos than zdoinos. Because dainos, you knew exactly what you're doing, so I have to do tshuva. I couldn't control myself. I have to do tshuva. But shoygig, so the Rebbe, it takes the shoygig in one's service. He says, it's like, I'm allowed to eat it. It has all the chsherim. What's your problem? The problem is that you indulge or you become that indulgence to the point where it leads it even leads to forbidden issues. So that is much harder. It's much harder to eat something kosher for the sake of Hashem than to just say, this is treif, and I have no connection to it. And this is what every frum Jew struggles with. The frum Jew, what? Yeah.
The question is though, what we said the three categories. Where is onus? Isn't onus another category?
It is, but it's not included because onus is bichlal. It's not halachically. It's not a sin. It's not an accident. You were forced, so it's not considered in halachic terms a sin. The Alter Rebbe and Tanya and other Svarim talk about a stain that's on the soul, because the bottom line is something that was done was still done and needs to be cleansed. But halachically, it's not considered that. Okay, Chevra, we'll learn tomorrow. Mitzvah Shem. Have a great day. Zay gesund. Shalom. Bye.